Afternoon, folks. Thank you so much for being here. I know the students are thrilled. I'm thrilled. I'm Laura Chesick, and on behalf of Kelley Burt. Kelley, where'd you go? Ah, okay, there you are. Vice Provost for Graduate Education and all of our colleagues at the graduate school, welcome to the 3-Minute Thesis. We think this is one of the best events of the year, largely because of you guys. So thank you for being here. As work nowadays and research nowadays becomes more and more interdisciplinary and interprofessional, it becomes ever more important to be able to communicate beyond the jargon of our disciplines, our fields, facilitate collaboration with other folks, and also make sure that we're understood to a larger audience. The greater community is very interested in what's happening in higher education. So the more we can do to facilitate their understanding of that, the better everything is. So with that, let me introduce the judges for today. I know you've seen the rules of the game playing up on the slides. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. But let me introduce our judges, starting with Jackie Copeland, an alum of the MPA program and a member of the UNCG Alumni Board. Next to him is Marianne LaGreco, faculty in the Department of Communication Studies and an expert in forensics competitions. No pressure. Here we have Sandra Hughes, whom you will recognize as the News 2 anchor, and we're very glad to have Sandra with us. And next to Sandra is Dean Priddy of the UNCG Board of Trustees. So your job is to make their job as difficult as possible, and I'm sure you will do that, but they're looking forward to having a great time. So with that, we're going to get started with our first student. Oh, by the way, there's money at stake today, right? The judges will award prizes, first place of $1,000, second place of $500, and the audience gets to vote, so make sure you all have your ballot. Don't fill them out in advance. Okay. But we're going to start with Brian Suttell from the Department of History, and the talk of Brian's presentation today is Campus to Counter, Civil Rights Activism in Raleigh and Durham, 1960 to 1963.
I invite the audience to think of a right that they would stand up for, that they would protest for, and think about how it would make them feel if the college that they were attending then denied them that right. This is essentially what happened right here on this campus, which was then the Women's College, and where the chancellor of the university told his students that he really didn't want them participating in the sit-ins downtown that had been sparked by the students at A&T. My research focuses on essentially what are the driving forces for integration and how do they counter the forces of segregation in Raleigh and Durham. And this research includes 23 interviews from participants in addition to archival research, of course. But the interviews that I've done with these participants have brought out many, many incredible stories, of course. And including, for instance, students at Shaw University. They were doing a sit-in, and up come some local whites, set 3 bullets on the counter. Pretty intimidating stuff. But I'm looking at, historians, they do more than just retell stories. We analyze the social forces that produce historical change. So the dissertation is termed Campus to Counter, that's the title, and it's playing on a double meaning, that students from historically black colleges were really the driving force in this movement. They literally went from campus to counter. They proceeded to the lunch counters to do the sit-ins. But in a more metaphorical sense, they were really the ones that were countering the forces of segregation you see over here. So by 1960, it looked maybe a little bit more like this, right? And those things would change. It's important to understand that the students at these 3 historically black colleges, Shaw, St. Aug, and North Carolina College, it's important to understand that they viewed the demonstrations as actually part of their education, as part of the ways to expand their opportunities. And thus, any restrictions on that were going to be viewed as restrictions on their academic freedom. Okay, so if a college president or a governor, for instance, told them they couldn't do this anymore, they viewed that as a restriction on their academic freedom. Now where the research triangle comes in here, the schools UNC, Duke, and NC State, is that they always had a rich tradition of preserving, standing up for academic freedom anyways. And so this sort of helped mobilize those forces and get them on the side of the forces of integration led by the protest triangle schools. Ultimately, the relevance, which is always an important thing to keep in mind in historical study, the relevance is understanding the connection between education and civil rights activism and academic freedom. And also really to understand the power of students to affect social change. Thank you.
Okay, so the way this works is our judges need a little bit of time between people to be able to note down their comments and scores. And when the judges indicate to us that they're ready to listen to the next person, we'll go on to the next person. All right, let's invite our next contestant, competitor, what do you want to be called?
Anything's fine.
Expert. Please welcome Priyanka Ruparelia from the Department of Nanoscience. The title of Priyanka's presentation is Cellulose Polymeric Material for Tissue Engineering.
With more than 206 bones, 100,000 miles long blood vessels, and 30 feet long intestines, a human body is simply exclusive and needs care. Why do I say so? Because we age. And with that, all the organs within our body lose some function gradually. Say, for example, blood vessels and airways become rigid and stiff. The most common organs affected in the body are heart, lungs, and kidney. With more than 28,000 people in the United States of America undergoing tissue or organ transplant, the global tissue engineering market size is valued to up to $4.7 billion and is increasing by $1 billion every year. The current solution in tissue engineering is tissue or organ replacement. The challenges with this solution are, first, the nail-biting wait for a tissue or organ donor. Second, what if there is an undetected infection in the donor tissue or organ? And yes, sometimes our body might reject these foreign tissues too. Through my research, I am working on a revolutionary new technique to overcome the problems with the current method. I am fabricating laboratory-based, fibrous and natural cellulose polymeric material, which is essentially using your own body cells on it to grow organs or tissues. Firstly, cells from site-specific tissue are cultured in the lab. Second, the cells are added to the cellulose polymeric material and are allowed to grow for a period of time. Lastly, the cells, along with the polymeric material, is implanted back at the site of tissue degradation or organ failure. The unique properties about our material is, first, it has size and shape which matches your body tissues. Second, it is biocompatible. As novel as our cellulose polymeric material is, it's just the beginning. In future, we are interested to study how versatile our material is by studying different cell lines, say for example, cancer cells as a biomedical treatment tool, or nerve cells for studying nervous system injuries. Our lab is also planning to introduce 3D printing these polymeric materials. This method will help restore normal functioning of an infected tissue while giving hope to patients with severe injuries or organ failure. This technique is the way to be less dependent on donors. Thank you.
So despite how they're making this look, if you think it's easy, not so much. It's really not. All right, let's please welcome Kelley Massengale from the Department of Public Health Education. The topic of Kelley's presentation is Buying Gas or a Box of Diapers? Diaper Need in Durham County, North Carolina.
A young child wearing diapers will wear as many as 360 diapers in a single month. When middle and upper income families are buying that many diapers, there are things that they do to save money. For example, they might go to a big box store to make a purchase. They might buy diapers in bulk or purchase them online. Unfortunately, low-income families do not have access to these same cost-saving measures. They may not have transportation to a big box store. They may not have a home address where somebody could deliver an online order. They may not have access to the internet. They may not have enough money saved up at one time to make a bulk purchase. As a result, the poorest 20% of families in the United States spend 14% of their household income just on diapers. For the richest 20% of families in America, this amounts to only 1% of household spending. Many people are surprised to find out that WIC, SNAP, and Medicaid benefits cannot be used to purchase diapers. From my research, I know families still have to meet this basic need in another way. Parents are extremely stressed trying to find diapers for their kids. Children are crying, tugging, and pulling at uncomfortable diapers. They may be wearing a single diaper for a day or longer. Families have reported to me that they have used towels or plastic bags or cloths or worn no diaper at all when their kids don't have enough diapers. My research looks at what happens whenever families are able to receive diapers from a community-based diaper bank, specifically the Diaper Bank of North Carolina, which is based in Durham County. From my research, we know that 75% of diaper recipient families are working families. These are families that are working 1 and 2 jobs, but still struggling to get by, living paycheck to paycheck. As one mother told me, at times it's been the difference between $20 for gas or $20 for a box of diapers. She could either put gas in the car to go to work and continue making money for her family, or she could use the $20 to buy the diapers her daughter needed in order to go to daycare so that she could go to work. It's a tough situation for many families in our community. From the literature, we know that one of the factors that can mitigate some of the long-term consequences of childhood poverty is a nurturing maternal relationship. Whenever families are able to receive diapers from the diaper bank, they reported to me that they experience much less stress, their children are happier, that happy mood is infectious. The entire family is happier. Families are able to spend more time having positive, playful, and nurturing interactions with their children instead of spending all of their time, energy, and resources trying to figure out where that next diaper is going to come from. Whenever you leave here today, I'd like to ask you to do a few things. I'd like to ask you to tell someone else about diaper need. This is not a topic that we talk about very often or that we even really think much about. And I'd like to ask you to consider donating your time, your money, or your extra diapers to your local diaper bank. Thank you.
All right, let's welcome Jed Diekfuss from the Department of Kinesiology. The topic of Jed's presentation is the influence of attentional focus on neuroplasticity following a 7-day balance training intervention.
So we've all seen the new ads and commercials for new apps such as brain games, luminosity, even Candy Crush that are supposed to challenge our mind and change our brain. Now, all these apps haven't been put through the rigor of experimental study. The general premise that challenging our mind can change our brain is mostly true. And the buzzword associated with this is neuroplasticity, which can be defined as our brain's ability to change its structure and function. Now, unique to previous work and what's often seen in popular media, I'm not only attempting to challenge the mind, but also challenge the body through a specialized balance training intervention. Now, we know from motor behavior research that if performers utilize an external focus of attention, it seems to enhance balance control. And what I mean by this is you can get individuals to stop worrying about the position of their knees, the position of their feet, and get their attention away from the body towards the environment. It seems to enhance learning of balance and improve balance control. Unfortunately, we don't really know why this is the case. Particularly from a neural level, we know the brain sends signals throughout the body. Thus, the purpose of my dissertation is to explore the neural mechanistic changes attributed to attentional focus. And to do this, I'm using something called resting state connectivity to look at the brain before and after just a week-long training intervention. So essentially, and as seen behind me, I have participants come to an MRI scanner, which is essentially just a big magnet that can non-invasively look inside the brain. I scan everybody's brain, and then I have them come to the lab and stand on one of these movable balance platforms for 1 hour a day for 7 straight days. However, I randomly assign the groups into an external focus and an internal focus condition. During the internal focus condition, I consistently remind participants to focus on keeping their feet level, whereas in the external focus, I consistently remind them to focus on keeping the board level, a very subtle yet powerful manipulation. This is evidence to the results that I've found up to this point. Specifically, I've found that those that practice an external focus, in blue here, improve their balance control by nearly 100%, while simultaneously increasing various connections between motor, visual, and sensory regions, which suggests that the brain is better and more efficient at processing that sensory information and sending those signals throughout the body. Now, so what? What does any of this mean? Well, first and foremost, we can add to the neuroplasticity buzzword that it's not only cognitive training that changes the brain, but it's also motor training, specifically balance training. We also know from injury, illness, aging, and disease, balance control can diminish. We know from older adults and from other literature that people can fall. And we also know that connections within the brain can deteriorate. Thus, this manipulation and these results could be a very easy and simple way to change performance and ultimately improve the brain in various clinical populations. Lastly, and just kind of a takeaway, so when you download a new game on your phone or a new app such as Luminosity or Brain Games, maybe you could take that, stand on a balance board, use an external focus, and improve balance control and positively change the brain. Thank you.
Okay, looks like we're ready. Let's welcome Katelyn Miller from the Department of Biology. The title of Katelyn's presentation is Pesticide Exposure with Epstein-Barr Virus Infection and the Potential Promotion of Cancer.
Almost everyone in this room has herpes. Actually, more than 95% of the world's population has herpes and are probably not aware of it. No, I'm not talking about herpes simplex virus 1 and 2 that causes cold sores and genital herpes, but I'm talking about human herpes virus 4, or Epstein-Barr virus. Epstein-Barr virus is so widespread since transmission of the virus is through the exchange of saliva, whether it be through kissing or sharing food and drink with others. Most people don't realize they have the virus since infection occurs early in life with symptoms similar to the cold and flu. Other times, if infection occurs during adolescence, the virus can cause infectious mononucleosis, or the kissing disease. Epstein-Barr virus is also associated with different types of cancer, such as Burkitt's lymphoma, gastric cancer, and Hodgkin's and non-Hodgkin's lymphomas. What's interesting about the virus is that it can go dormant or be inactive in our cells. During this time, the virus produces proteins to help it remain undetected by our immune system. However, these same proteins produced also play a major role in Epstein-Barr virus-related cancers. Pesticides, like organophosphates, are commonly used around the world. Malathion, for example, is used residentially and agriculturally to eliminate insects from crops and from gardens, and can be purchased at your hardware store. There are many studies investigating if and how pesticides can contribute to cancers. However, many of these studies lack experimental lab data. Currently, there are few studies looking at Epstein-Barr virus interactions with environmental factors like pesticide exposure. It is important to look at pesticides and the virus since both are ubiquitous and some cancers associated with both overlap. My project looks to see if there is a relationship between viral infection and pesticide exposure to further promote cancers associated with Epstein-Barr virus. For my project, I use human cell lines infected with the virus, and I expose them to pesticides for a short 24-hour time period and chronically for several weeks to see if viral protein levels change. Any changes in viral protein levels will give us a glimpse on how the virus reacts to the environment and if it can negatively affect humans. My results show that viral protein levels do change when infected cells are exposed to pesticides for a short amount of time when the virus is active, and when exposed for several weeks when the virus is inactive, as seen in the graph. This is particularly important since Epstein-Barr virus-related cancers depend on viral protein level changes when the virus is in this inactive or dormant state. My project will contribute to Epstein-Barr virus biology and how the virus reacts to and interacts with the environment and how those interactions affect human health.
Okay, is it getting tough yet? Yeah. Let's please welcome Paula Swindle from the Department of Counseling and Educational Development. The title of Paula's presentation is Religious Abuse, a Twisting of the Sacred.
Counselors assess for many things, including whether or not their clients are coming from a spiritual or religious worldview. And if the client discloses a positive relationship with religion, counselors generally know what to do with this and how to use this as a strength in the counseling process. However, if a client discloses an abusive experience in a religious setting where the sacred has been used to harm or to hurt rather than to heal, there's not much guidance out there for counselors around this. So my research has focused on understanding what these experiences might be in order to better equip counselors to address them. So what my research has found is that the types of abuse that may occur within a religious context seem to fall into three very broad categories. The first broad category being abuse that comes from religious leadership. So an example of this might be sexual abuse that's coming from a member of the clergy. The second broad category being abuse that comes from the religious system or the religious group or a member of the group or the system representing the group. So examples of this might be a church that engages in or promotes systemic racism, or a client who discloses that they felt bullied by a church because of their sexual orientation. The third broad category is where there's a spiritual component inherent to the abuse, where the abuse seems to be driven by someone's theology or their religious beliefs. So some examples of this might be a husband who physically abuses his wife and uses theology to justify that, or a parent who tells their child that they are evil and that God told them to beat the evil out of them. And they engage in physical abuse of that child. So you can see how different experiences may fall into one or more of these categories, so there certainly may be overlap within these categories. What I've also found is that across all the different types of abuse, there seem to be four pretty common themes that people might experience as a result of religious abuse. The first one being feelings of betrayal. So betrayal is that realization that someone on whom you depended or that you trusted has harmed you in some way. So you can imagine if this is coming from a person or a system that you trusted with your spiritual development or your spiritual guidance, that betrayal might be felt on a very deep or sacred level. There may be experiences of stigma, which are those feelings of blame or shame or scapegoating that might come as a result of the abuse, especially when it's revealed to the religious system. There may be experiences of powerlessness. If you can imagine, for people who believe in God, what is more powerful than God? And so if you've been abused by someone who's a representative of God or who is abusing in the name of God, that feeling of powerlessness really has the potential to be greatly amplified there. And there may also be experiences of trauma, that deep emotional distress as a result of the abuse. So I'm very passionate about helping counselors be better equipped to address this if it were to come up with a client. Thank you.
So did you realize you were going to get to hear about so many different things today? Very cool. All right, let's please welcome Brian Cohn from Kinesiology. The title of Brian's presentation is Where Fall Prevention Went Wrong.
I'd like to start off with a personal story that I'm sure is familiar to many of you. A few years ago, my grandmother tripped over a curb and broke her leg. While the effects weren't immediate, over a period of time, her health steadily declined, unfortunately, and she passed away. Falls are the leading cause of injury-related deaths in the United States for adults who are 65 and over. That is because of a variety of factors. Between impaired vision, reduced leg strength, and other factors, it has become an increasingly multifactorial prevention strategy in order to try to reduce this fall risk. Currently, though, the fall rates for injury-related deaths have actually increased every year for the last decade. The hypothesis that I have behind this is that prevention experts have only been looking at these individual deficits instead of looking at a person's general balanceability. So my theoretical framework for my research is that there is an ability to use mathematical analyses in order to detect fall risk from a person's walking patterns. And we can do this by measuring the time between their heel contacts as they walk. What we found in previous research is that young, healthy adults have a type of walking pattern that has robotic elements, yet also has some randomness. You don't want an individual to be too robotic because then they won't have the flexibility to overcome obstacles, and you don't want them to be too random because then they don't have the coordination to walk evenly throughout our environment. So for my research, we've already tested this on young adults, and we found that by repeatedly tripping them, we are able to see that there is an increase in their ability to recover from a trip, as well as an ability for them to reorganize these walking patterns so that they're actually able to resist this trip more often. So for my dissertation research, what I'm going to do is I'm going to collect data from a number of older adults. I'm going to attach them to a harness treadmill to ensure that there's no chance of them falling. And at first, I'm going to have them walk for 10 minutes so that we can just collect their walking pattern information. Next, we will induce a series of trips via a motorized treadmill, and we'll be able to collect their response by using a motion capture camera system similar to what you see in the movies and video games to digitize characters. And from that, we'll be able to see how well they can keep their body within their feet. So my hope for this is that we can start to use both an inclusive approach and an individual approach for fall prevention research. Using this will allow a paradigm shift away from what's been done and what's been shown really not to work as well as it should, and into a new era. Thank you.
All right. Let's welcome, please, Stacy Rice from the Department of English. The topic of Stacy's presentation is War, What is it good for? Protest Rhetoric and Modern Technology.
499,000. That's nearly 500,000. That's how many US soldiers have died fighting in World War II, the Vietnam War, the Gulf War, and the Iraq War. This number, as staggering as it is, does not include civilian deaths. It does not include military injury. It does not include missing in action or prisoners of war. Yet, despite such a staggering statistic, there have been moments in American history where the collective at large of the American public has said, this war is justified. For example, America's entrance into World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor. But even when we look back in history at these moments where we think, yes, that war was justified, the public agreed, we will fight this war, there have always been those who contested that decision, the others, the outsiders, and oftentimes in history, their voices are suppressed. But these are the voices that need attention, that need scholarly research and investigation, because these are the voices that question, the voices that critique, the voices that protest. My research examines the way both pro-war and anti-war collectives have used emerging electronic technologies to support and protest war. During World War II, we saw Franklin Roosevelt and other collectives who supported the war use the radio to reach out to the public and ask for continuing support. During the Vietnam War, television replaced the radio as the prominent means of communication. And people saw, sometimes for the very first time, what combat looked like as it unfolded, leading many to protest. During the Gulf War, television became increasingly sophisticated, now allowing for live-time, real-time action to be reported halfway across the world. During the Iraq War, we saw the internet rise as a means of communication where people could find similar collectives, those who agreed or disagreed, they could band together and they could have a public voice in a way they hadn't before. Using a theoretical framework offered by communications theorist Marshall McLuhan, I examine the way increasingly sophisticated electronic technologies can draw people together in what is called a tribalization effect, meaning people find like-minded groups who support or protest war, and they use their public voice to persuade others in the American public to join their cause. Ultimately, what I aim to uncover are hypotheses and patterns that can predict what collective and counter-collective action might look like should the US engage in future war. Ultimately, I would like to aim to propose a hypothesis where people can empathetically understand not just the pro-war and not just the counter-collective of anti-war protesters, but so that both collectives could understand each other, and instead of having separate tribalizations, we could have one massive tribalization. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're good. I don't know whether it's better or worse to be near the end. You have to wait a longer time, but you get to see what everybody else is doing, right? Let's please welcome Reynaldo Diaz from Nanoscience. The title of Reynaldo's presentation is, What Can Cicadas and Beer Teach Us About Fighting Superbacteria?
So what can cicadas and beer teach us about fighting superbacteria? First, let me define what superbacteria is. And no, it's not a character out of DC or Marvel comic. Might as well be a supervillain, though. Because superbacteria are bacteria that resist our toughest and strongest antibiotics. Our general strategy since the invention of penicillin to deal with bacteria has been to create new antibiotics But eventually, bacteria develops resistance to these antibiotics, and we become into this cyclical arms race to deal with bacteria. One of the ways that bacteria develops resistance is by clumping together and forming what is known as biofilms. Biofilms make them sturdier against external stressors like superbacteria, like antibiotics. Now, what does beer have to do with all this? Spoiler alert, drinking a daily beer is not going to help you fight superbacteria. I'm actually more interested in the microbial beer maker, the yeast. Thanks to beer, we have studied yeast so extensively that we can tweak them and use them in our lab to model biofilms. And specifically, in our lab, we're interested in these little sticky filaments found in the cell wall. These sticky filaments are essential for the formation of biofilms and adhering to different surfaces. Now, what cicada have to do with all this? Cicada is a fascinating animal, but I'm specifically interested in the wing. If I magnify 100,000 times, and let me put that in perspective, 100,000 times is so small that even light won't bounce out of it. We will see that it's composed of these, what looks like a bed of nails or nanopillars. Each of these nanopillars is 50 nanometers wide and 100 nanometers long. A nanometer, to give you a perspective, if you have the width of an average human hair and chopped it up 100,000 times, that's what a nanometer is. So if we expose yeast that we model with these sticky filaments to these bed of nails, we notice that they get destroyed. And it's not a chemical reaction thanks to the antibiotics. It's actually mechanically being disrupted. I am stabbing yeast, and it works for fungi, as we see there, and it works for bacteria. And it's essential the role that the adhesion protein plays, that sticky filaments. But part of my project is develop the techniques to actually see these things because they're so small. The other part is localizing where it's found on the bed of nails. This is going to give us another alternative to fighting superbacteria and eventually contribute to making a weapon of mass bacterial destruction. Thank you very much for your attention.
All right, let's welcome the most patient person in the room. Please welcome Ghina'a Abu Deiab from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. The title of Ghina's presentation is Creation of Neuroprotective Molecules for the Potential Treatment of Stroke.
Hello, my name is Ghina'a, and I would like to find a treatment for a stroke. Every year, about 800,000 people have a stroke in the United States. Every 4 minutes, one person will die because of stroke. Not only this, we are all familiar with a stroke and have someone in our family or a friend who had a stroke. People who survive a stroke often end up with serious physical problems with hearing, talking, walking, or other physical disabilities. This is what stroke does. It does not just take our lives, it makes our life difficult. And why is that? Stroke is caused by a blood clot, which will prevent the blood to go to the brain, and so causes further damage in the brain tissue. Now, there is no single drug that can prevent this damage in the brain tissue. All medicines that are available on the market, like aspirin or Plavix, they just stop or clear up the clot at the time stroke happens. My research focuses on making molecules that have the potential to protect the brain from this damage. There is a molecule that is called prostacyclin, which is being produced in the blood of everyone in this room right now. Prostacyclin is important for our brain, however, it's not stable. In fact, only half of the prostacyclin molecules that your body made at the beginning of my presentation will be present at the end of my presentation. I made the molecule shown on the screen here, which mimics prostacyclin, but it has higher stability. To understand how I made this molecule, you can just think about it like baking a cake. But instead of using sugar or flour, I used simple chemicals that are on the bottom right of the slide, which are available in our lab. The molecule I made only required 9 steps, which made our process the shortest between other processes by different research groups. Moreover, I have been making other molecules where we change the structure of this parent molecule, and they were all sent to a research lab that studies stroke at Stanford Medical School. My research will enable us to pick the most effective and safe drug for stroke that can move forward for human clinical trials. Stroke would like to destroy our life, but we will win the fight. Thank you.
Sorry for the slight delay. It is very much the truth that you made our judges work really hard for what we're paying them especially, which is cookies, yeah. Can we please have a round of applause for our judges? And can we please have a round of applause for all of the students who are brave enough to do this? It's really, really impressive to hear what you're all doing. Thank you for the opportunity. So without further ado, we will begin with the People's Choice Award, which will go to Jed Diekfuss of Kinesiology. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. The second place award of $500. And by the way, People's Choice is $250. The second place award of $500 will go to Paula Swindle. Congratulations. And the first place award of $1,000 and the responsibility to represent UNCG at the regional competition to take place in March next spring will go to Jed Diekfuss.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all. I hope you've had as great a time as we've had. Please stay and congratulate the winners and help yourself to whatever refreshments are left, but thanks for coming.